by folks like you who give us your support. So we thank you very much for coming out. I have indeed the great pleasure to introduce our next lecturer this evening, this gentleman right here. This is my dear friend, Zac Beaver. He is a volunteer here at Delaware County Historical Society, and he's also in charge of helping to curate the programming. Zac has been working on this presentation for quite a few months now, a couple months, and we are very excited to see the results of his findings. So this is a really interesting story, and I'm very excited for you all to hear it. So I'm going to now turn things over to Mr. Zac Beaver. Zac? Thanks.
Hi, how's it going? Like Paul said, my name is Zac Beaver. I'm the programming guy here at DCHS. I was born on August 9th, 1986 at Crozier Hospital in Chester, and I am older than every single skyscraper in Philadelphia. Now, literally, every single one. So 38 is a moderately aged human being, but it's an incredibly young city's first skyscraper. And there's a reason for that, and that's because it was basically impossible to make a building taller than the top of this building, City Hall, until 1986. The first building to be built taller than that is Liberty One, topping out at, it was finished in 1987. It tops out at 945 feet, and for reference, in 1987, I was 1.5 feet tall. But I would continue to grow. And by the time I was about 5 feet tall, I was falling asleep every night looking up at this poster, which is Josh Kalis doing a 360 flip over a trash can at Love Park, which is right down the street from Liberty One. Now, a person could argue that Love Park is where street skating was invented. That person is me. I am going to make that argument later. But first, we need to talk about sort of who created Love Park. And to talk about who created Love Park, we need to talk about, I'll get there, right? So this is Edmund Bacon. Edmund Bacon is a beloved son of Rose Valley, father of Kevin Bacon, and the designer of Love Park, as well as basically all of modern Philadelphia. But to understand to understand Edmund Bacon, you need to understand William Price. Oh, wrong button. And to understand William Price, you need to understand William Penn. All right. So, all of this is sort of leading up to what my lecture is really about, which is Quaker real estate development. But if I told you that this was a lecture about Quaker real estate development, none of you would have come. So, well, you would have come. But yeah, Swarthmore would have come. William Penn is really America's first real estate developer. He's a lot of other things. He's a lot of things to a lot of people. If you were a German who was into philosophy, he was a pamphleteer who wrote some really great pamphlets like No Cross, No Crown. That's a personal favorite. That also got him put in jail. A lot of his books got him put in jail. He spent a lot of time in jail. And that's because he was born during the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation wasn't fun at all. I think that a lot of us are kind of given a pretty cursory explanation of what the Protestant Reformation is. This guy, Martin Luther, he nails some complaints to a door, the church gets really upset, and now you can be like a Methodist or something, right? But in reality, the Protestant Reformation is like a century and a half of really bloody civil wars, a lot of violence. The plague is in there, there's pestilence, there's starvation, and there's a lot of witch trials, right? Or, if you live in France, werewolf trials. It's a little regional variation, right? Give me 1 second here. This is the world that Penn is born into. And it's sort of the problem that Penn spends his life trying to solve. No Cross, No Crown, which I mentioned earlier, is sort of proposes the idea of founding the European Union hundreds of years before anybody would actually try and do that, basically to stop the Protestant Reformation. not to stop people from changing religions, but to stop the wars about people changing religions. So anyway, the Protestant Reformation is obviously ideological, obviously economic, because the church made all of the economic decisions for you. They decided what you were going to grow, when you were going to grow it, who you could sell it to. But the Protestant Reformation is also, I think very importantly, a technological Reformation. This is Gutenberg. He invented the European printing press. The first printing press was invented in South Korea, or what is now South Korea. It's definitely like a fun afternoon in Wikipedia if you want to look up Korean printing presses. They're really cool. Anyway, so with the invention of the printing press, you didn't need these huge monasteries full of scribes anymore. You could just print material out. And that meant that the church was no longer the only source of information. You could share information with your friends. You could have your own beliefs about the information you were given. This drove everyone insane, right? And that it's kind of exactly what we're living through now with the advent of the internet and social media, right? Hopefully, I mean, I don't know. I don't think that right now is as bad as the Protestant Reformation, but you know, we'll figure it out. Yeah. All right. So this is Sir William Penn, Sr. This is our William Penn's dad. And he was a pretty accomplished officer in the Navy. He was sort of tangentially in the court of King Charles I. And by the time that our William Penn was 4 years old, King Charles had his head cut off by Oliver Cromwell and the Puritans. This would sort of really mess things up for the Penns for about a decade. They would kind of become, I guess, posh itinerants is probably the best way to describe it. They would, at one point, Sir William went to the Caribbean. They spent a lot of time on land that had been confiscated from Catholics in Ireland. But the Puritans were, they were fundamentalists. They liked to torture people, and they were pretty terrifying. So it was not a good time. During this period, William Penn lives in Ireland. That's the first time he meets Thomas Lowe, who is a Quaker missionary, who would be really influential in his life. And then by the time I think he's in his late teens, the Protestant Reformation, well, look, his dad, Sir William, goes to The Hague, brings King Charles, the Prince Charles, eventually King Charles, brings him back to London, restores him to the throne, and that's a period we call the Restoration. So the Restoration basically brought the Penns kind of back into a more stable upper middle class or upper class life. The Restoration is also the time period that a lot of us think about when we think about historical sort of England. It's sort of it's like Bridgerton. Bridgerton is sort of during the Restoration, even though Bridgerton's not real. It's kind of, the Restoration is like aesthetically the ideal, right? Because it has all of the ritual and pomp and circumstance of the Victorian era, but without like all of the pollution and the orphans and all of the terrifying Industrial Revolution stuff, right? So this is the period that people like. With things a bit more stable, the Penns send their son William off to Oxford. And at Oxford, most of the students in Oxford fall into three distinct camps. You have your Quakers, you have your Puritans, and your Cavaliers. Right? And the Cavaliers, the Cavaliers are the sons of the sort of men who benefited from the Restoration. And there's a reason that we still use that word today to describe someone who just like doesn't care about your feelings or what's going on, right? They partied pretty hard. They were bullies. They were not Penn's people, even though he should have technically been kind of like king of the Cavaliers because his dad was the guy who put the restore and restoration. He didn't hang out with them. He tended to keep to himself. He got in a surprising amount of trouble. He left. He came back. He wasn't a Quaker yet. And he obviously wasn't a Puritan, although the Puritans did have a fair amount of influence on early Quakers. Just to sort of tie in our own collection here, the Puritans had a big effect on what would eventually be called plainclothes. And we have this print here by Benjamin West. It'll be on display tomorrow during our open house in the front room. And it's a nice depiction of a sort of generational divide between... this is Benjamin West's, I think, dad and uncle? Yeah, so his father and another guy. And then this is him and his wife and children, and they are obviously much fancier dressed than he is. So I really just threw this in here so you might come and look at it tomorrow, hopefully. So while he was away at Oxford, he came home, he had a bad time at Oxford, and he was eventually expelled. And so his parents, being the good, noble people that they were, they sent him to go live with the Sun King himself, Louis XIV, which he didn't really like. He liked Notre Dame. He thought that was cool. He thought Catholicism was beautiful because he really didn't have too much exposure to Catholicism living in Anglican England, right? But he actually spent most of his time hanging out with the Huguenots, who were sort of French Protestant separatists who were regularly being killed by Louis XIV. And this is where you start to see that, as Penn goes across Europe, he's collecting the people who will eventually move to Pennsylvania. So a lot of Huguenots, a lot of Catholics, a lot of Germans. That's why Germantown exists. Yeah, I mean, that's it. So what did he do after that? Oh, I got way ahead of myself. Okay. So after his time in France, he comes back, and he's a much more sort of mature, established guy. His father starts using him as a go-between between himself and King Charles II. He starts handling a fair amount of family business, and then Sir William gets gout. And gout is it's a buildup of uric acid in your bloodstream from eating too much fatty refined foods, and back then it was actually a little bit of a status symbol. People faked having gout because most people couldn't just eat foie gras all the time and stuff. This is actually a Victorian image of gout, but every depiction in Europe of gout is a little demon that's attacking your feet. I don't know, I've never had gout. So because he had gout, Penn goes back to the Irish land that they had to sort of oversee things. And this trip to Ireland on the behest of his family really changes Penn's life, because not only because of what he did in Ireland, but also what was happening back in England while he was gone. Back in England, they had the plague. The plague came back again for the fourth time. They had a great fire. The Great Fire of London, which started in a little bakery and then eventually burned down 13,000 homes and 87 churches. And Penn sort of, he did two very different things. One, he put down an Irish uprising, which is not great. And then he had his portrait painted as a soldier, which is sort of the last... This is an image that at the time he thought was really cool, and then he came to regret a lot. And then shortly after that, he links back up with Thomas Lowe and converts to Quakerism at 22. All of the things I mentioned happened in the first 22 years of his life. And I say that because it's sort of building up all of the issues that Penn will spend the rest of his life trying to find solutions to. I mean, Pennsylvania is sort of a solution to that. So now that he's a Quaker, here's some Quakers. Now that he is a Quaker, his life actually gets way more complicated, and he starts being put in jail all the time, because that's where England was at the time. So during the Commonwealth era, which is the sort of Cromwell Puritan time period, you couldn't really be Catholic. The Puritans really persecuted Catholics, and they destroyed a lot of Catholic relics. They attacked the clergy. They were not much friendlier to Anglicans, but they allowed a certain amount of what you'd call Protestant dissenters. And it meant that when the Restoration happened and the Anglican Church took back over, there was all of these different dissenting versions of Protestantism that were at odds with the Anglican Church. I have and they have some pretty cool names. There's the Seekers, the Ranters, the Soul Sleepers, the Diggers, the Levelers, the Muggletonians. There's also the Antimonians and Momonians. There's a lot of really, really tiny sects of Protestantism all over England, and the crown kind of goes at war with them because also King Charles II is like secretly Catholic the whole time. It's a wild period to be a Christian in Europe. So naturally, Penn's family had little choice but to completely disown him and cut him off, because his Quakerism was a real threat to like their livelihoods, to the land they owned. I mean, because the king, especially after the Restoration, the king was in charge of what you had. He could just take away whatever he wanted you to not have anymore. So now Penn is homeless, and he's sort of being a sort of an itinerant Quaker, and he links up with George Fox, the founder of Quakerism, of my religion, of many of your religions, you know. And he sort of becomes Quakerism's first theologian. He starts to write a lot about it. He proselytizes, which is a thing that we don't really do anymore, and he really refines a lot of Quaker teaching. But he also winds up in prison a lot. He winds up here in Newgate Prison, which was a prison from 1188 to 1902, which is just a really long time for there to be one prison in one place. But he's able to get out of a lot of these prison sentences because he's a pretty decent representative of himself. He's a decent lawyer. And a lot of the things that he does become standard procedure in Western law. So one of the ways that he routinely gets out of being sentenced to life in prison is through the use of habeas corpus. He tells them to show him the injured party, and they never do, because there is no injured party, because he's just out there talking about being a Quaker. He also experiences jury nullification. Jury nullification has been in the news a lot recently because courts in New York are afraid that the juries set to adjudicate Luigi Mangioni's case might nullify it. Jury nullification is when a jury decides that they don't care about the law and they just want someone to go free. Penn got his jury nullified at least twice. And he's here at Newgate Prison when Sir William Penn, now Admiral Penn, is on his deathbed. He begs his father not to bail him out because he doesn't want the crown to get any of that money. His father refuses, does bail him out, ships him back to the family home, and they reconcile pretty shortly before Admiral Penn dies. And Admiral Penn had come to really respect his son's convictions and values. And so he writes to the Duke of York and to King Charles II, and he begs them to look after William when he's gone. He dies. The king makes him the royal counselor. He becomes incredibly wealthy, and then he doesn't change a single thing about his behavior, and he goes directly back to jail. And then he gets released, and then he goes back to jail again. And then he goes out with George Fox to Germany, meets a lot of Germans, and he and George decide that it's really time for the Quakers to leave England, because the Puritans had already gotten New England. And so they couldn't really go there because without the crown above them, the Puritans started getting like really violent. And if you were a Quaker in New England, it was not safe. So they couldn't go there. The Catholics had Maryland, so they settled on New Jersey. First West Jersey. And New Jersey's different. They purchased New Jersey with their own funds. They didn't really get a lot of help from the crown. They bought first West Jersey and then East Jersey. We usually divide Jersey up into North and South. Not them. They were doing West and East. But New Jersey is now the most densely populated state in the country. But back then it was like a really, really hard place to live. The soil was hard to farm before chemical fertilizer. The swamps were really dangerous. It was a great place to make glass, so there were lots of beer brewers and things like that in New Jersey, but not a lot of yeoman farmers. And that was really Penn's dream, was this sort of a state full of freeholders, right? So Penn asks for Pennsylvania. The whole time they've been looking at this land across the Delaware, and so he just throws this Hail Mary pass to the king, and he's like, oh, maybe he'll give it to him. And then the king just straight up gives him enough land to make William Penn the single largest landholder in the world at the time. He had 45,000 square miles that he had to do something with, which is how you get to real estate development, right? And the king, so if you're a good Quaker and you're given 45,000 square miles of land, your first step is going to be to go figure out who lives on that land and buy it from them again. So that's what he did. He came here, he came to Chester, like Paul mentioned a moment ago, and he starts buying up land from the Lenape peoples, but also from the Swedes and the Dutch and anybody else who's here. The king finds out about this. He gets really mad because reasonably, if you gave someone a gift and then they bought that gift from someone else, it undermines your authority to give away that land, right? So Penn turns around and he goes, oh, I totally understand. I let you give that to me because you're my friend, but you never owned it, and this isn't my problem. Naturally, when Penn would then go back to England, he'd be put in jail again for a long time. So the other thing that the king expects Penn to do is to set up sort of like little fiefdoms, like petty little landlords all over Pennsylvania, because that's what kings do, right? They give away land, and then they make the people they give the land to subjugate the people who live there to pay taxes back to the king, right? So Penn didn't want to do that. Penn didn't want to do that not just because I think he was more moral, I guess, than the king, but also because that takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of effort, and you have to subjugate a lot of people, which he just didn't want to and couldn't. So instead, he starts giving away these parcels. So when the Restoration happened, it established a new parliament that they often called the Pensionary Parliament. And that's because it gave away so much land and so much money to the nobles that it restored. It created these things that they call in England rotten and pocket boroughs. And a rotten and pocket borough is a little sort of estate or county or something that has no inhabitants but does have political representation. And it's one of the ways that the sort of class structure in England was able to keep itself going for so long, because you'd have these like noble people who represent no one but are in the parliament. Anyway, the Restoration made a lot of those. And Penn really didn't want that to happen in Pennsylvania. And so, instead of creating these, little landlords, he starts giving out the land with the instruction that it needs to be distributed, either given away or sold. And so these big tracts become smaller subdivisions, which become parcels, which become lots. And he's pretty successful. Like 55% of the inhabitants of colonial Pennsylvania are freeholders, meaning they or their family own the land that they're working. There are some tenants, and then there's less than 20% are here on indenture or are an employee. That's pretty impressive, right? Like that's really unique in colonial America. But over time, the parcels get smaller and smaller. People run out of options, and you're basically like, you need to get rid of your neighbors if you want to sell their land. And this creates one of the things that William Penn never wanted to happen again, which are witch trials. This is Margaret Matson. This is not actually Margaret Matson. This is just a woman who wears Swedish clothing from the 1600s. This is just an illustration. There are no pictures of Margaret Matson. Margaret Matson was a Finnish Swede who was from, it's not really clear where she was from. We think that she and her husband, Neil, his name was Niels, that they were Swedish healers in the Finnish tradition. I don't know what that means, but they did that. They sailed to Delco through Gothenburg port, the port of Gothenburg, in 1653, and they came to Chester in 1654. Interestingly, by the time, within a couple of years, Oh, sorry, I got ahead of myself. So this area, Delco, was called New Sweden back then because the Swedes were experiencing an empire, a really shortly lived empire called the Stormikskiden. I think I'm saying that right. This is it here. They had one colony, Delco, New Sweden, and then they spent all of their money building this massive warship called the Vasa, which immediately sunk the moment that they launched it and bankrupted the entire sort of empire. And it wasn't like they collapsed the next day, but their colony was over and they immediately started losing land. The moment that they started losing that land, Peter Stuyvesant came down from New Amsterdam and just sacked everyone involved and got rid of everybody, except for a few of the inhabitants. And Matson and her husband was one of those people. This is Peter Stuyvesant. So there are a few things that the Swedes left behind other than Matson and her neighbors. One of those things is the Schuylkill River. We call it the Schuylkill River because of the Swedes. The other thing is the color of Philadelphia's flag is blue and yellow because of the Swedes. Also, the Swedes were the first people to bring enslaved African people here, specifically one guy named Anthony Svart. And by the time the Quakers showed up, he had been emancipated. It's not totally clear how, but he was the most talented sailor on the rivers around what had been New Sweden. And so he was an invaluable resource to Penn, especially when Penn was trying to get from Chester to Philadelphia. Because to us, this land is all really solid, but back then it was a lot of really complicated islands. Like the airport was an island, and Fort Mifflin was an island, and it was harder to navigate. So, excuse me. Matson's trial was, well, I'll get to that in a second. So by the time Matson was standing on trial, she had lived in Sweden. She had lived here in New Sweden, which had then become New Netherlands, and then New Britain, and then finally Quaker, Pennsylvania. And today her farm is the soccer stadium in Chester, which is, kind of cool. So Matson's trial, this is actually an illustration of one of Penn's trials. We don't have an illustration of Matson's trial. But Matson's trial was as bad, if not worse, than any of the trials that Penn had been subjected to. There was basically unlimited hearsay. They accused her of such generic crimes as flying on brooms, hexing oxen, causing bad dreams, and generating birds. It literally says generating birds. Some of the people that... So it was all hearsay. So people were claiming that her own daughter was accusing her. They were claiming that her neighbors were all accusing her. And we don't... There's a pretty good transcript of this trial, but there's one key thing missing, and that's that Penn gave really specific instructions to the jury right before they went to deliberate. We know the arguments that were made, we know everything but these instructions, and when the jury came back, they announced that while she had a co-conspirator, her neighbor, while the two of them were guilty of having the infamy of being a witch, they had not technically bewitched anyone and were free to go. And so they immediately moved to New Jersey because they just weren't hanging out. So this, it's kind of a win for Quakerism. It's a win for Pennsylvania, I think. Penn really sort of dodged a pretty big bullet here. But it had some pretty strong lasting effects, mostly because this guy, Cotton Mather, heard about it. And Cotton Mather was a weird little freak. His dad, Increase Mather, was the president of Harvard, and he was like a minister and like a culture warrior. He was a mess. But he wrote this book, partially based on what happened here. I'm going to read the whole title of this book. This is the kind of title that books in the 1600s had, so it's going to take a minute. Memorable Providences relating to witchcrafts and possessions, a faithful account of many wonderful and surprising things that have befallen several bewitched and possessed persons in New England, particularly a narrative on the marvelous trouble and relief experienced by a pious family in Boston, very lately and sadly molested with evil spirits. whereunto is added a discourse delivered unto a congregation in Boston on the occasion of that illustrious providence, semicolon, as also a discourse delivered unto the same congregation on the occasion of a horrible self-murder committed in that town, another semicolon, with an appendix vindication of a chapter in the late book of remarkable providences from the colonies of a Quaker in Pennsylvania. This book is the blueprint for the Salem witch trials. Cotton Mather looked at this as well as another witch trial in western Massachusetts, and he worked backwards trying to figure out how to make charges like this stick, how to turn those charges into executions, and then personally oversaw them at Salem. It was immediately a controversy and a disaster. Right? He thought he was going to become the president of Harvard like his dad. He did not. He was pretty much ruined. The other thing that happened is it changed the shape of Delco forever. So if you look over here, you see all these really tiny little sort of, all the things that we were quizzing everybody on, all these little census designated places and boroughs and villages. This is all the subdivision that I was talking about. These are people just like selling land constantly. And they're all people who accused Matson of witchcraft. If you look to the west and north, these are all really huge tracts. A lot of this is sort of unincorporated territory. Most of these are basically the same as what Penn gave away. These people did not accuse Matson of witchcraft. I don't know. That's pretty interesting to me. Okay, moving on. So Penn thought that commerce could defeat tribalism. He thought that having simple, basic relationships based on like mutual need and shared resources could stop people from ganging up on each other. And instead, it made it even worse. It never got as bad as the 1,000-person witch trials of the Protestant Reformation. But as you can tell here, I mean, people just kept dividing up their land, and they did steal a lot of it from each other. This is kind of the theme. Like, this is the theme of this lecture is this idea that you were born into a specific circumstance, you try to improve that circumstance, and you just wind up in a slightly different, better, but not perfect version of what you were trying to avoid. Now, if you're looking through all of these documents, for all of this sort of subdivision and real estate development, you start to see the same names over and over again. Two of those names are Lightfoot and Price, which brings me to my next Quaker real estate developer, William Lightfoot Price. This is a painting of him. He was born in the 1860s in Wallingford, if I'm correct. And 1860s in America is like kind of as bad as the Protestant Reformation. I mean, maybe it's a little bit better. It's not great. His dad, John Martin Price, was a nurseryman and a teacher at Westtown. This is a illustration of the Westtown School, which is over in, it's really right on the border of Delco and Chester County. This is a somewhat famous painting of it. I don't think it ever really looked just like that. I don't think that's a real view you can get of it, but it's a good painting. His dad was a nurseryman. A lot of men were nurserymen. To us and to William Penn, Pennsylvania is this wooded, verdant place. But if you were living in the middle of the 19th century, it was not. We clear-cut everything and then had to replant all of it. We reintroduced deer. We reintroduced squirrels. Like, we ruined the environment here and then fixed it, which is, Anyway, he grew up in a family that valued art, that valued conversation, that valued sort of the liberal arts as well. He went to what would eventually become the University of the Arts, but at the time I think it was the Industrial Arts University. His classmates were all equally accomplished artists on their own right. So there was a lecture about William Price at school in Rose Valley a couple of weeks ago that was great. So that was really mostly about his sort of artistry and talent, and I'm really here to talk about sort of his organizational beliefs, his development beliefs. So I'll just dip into that for in a minute. He then went on to work for this guy, Addison Hutton. Addison Hutton made buildings that look like this, and this, and this. So, like, solid, decent buildings. Then he left and went and worked for Frank Furness. And Furness made buildings that looked like this, and this, and this. This is the inside of that building, which is wild. This is now the PAFA Gallery. I think there's something really, what's the word I'm looking for? Daring. Painting the walls of an art gallery bright orange. I think that's kind of a crazy thing to do. Hiring Addison Hutton to design your building never got anyone fired. Choosing Frank Furness got you death threats. People felt very strongly one way or the other about Frank Furness's designs, and Frank Furness was like fully on board with that. Also, his family was used to getting death threats. His dad ran the First Unitarian Church in Philadelphia. He officiated John Brown's funeral. He was such a hardcore abolitionist that he required the people sitting in the front row of that church to carry guns in case someone tried to kill him. So the idea that, like, Frank Furness would lose sleep over people being mad at the buildings he built, that seems unlikely to me. So William Price's designs, again, I'm sort of talking about, not necessarily spending a ton of time talking about William Price as sort of artist and architect directly, but they're kind of right in the middle of Addison Hutton and Frank Furness. I mean, he has his own flavor, he has his own style, but you can kind of see some overlap. This is Rose Valley Improvement Company house number 2, I think. It's 1 or 2. No, it's 2 or 3 actually. This is number 2. 2. Yeah, isn't that where you live? Yeah. This picture of his house. This is a CVS. This is a Trader Joe's. So you can kind of see like that he had the same kind of formalistic interest that Hutton had, but also was not afraid of doing sort of more decorative things. He died relatively young, which is why we know who Frank Lloyd Wright is. Frank Lloyd Wright is not as good as William Price. He's not a good person. I don't like Frank Lloyd Wright. Hate that guy. I'm not trying to editorialize too much about Frank Lloyd Wright. He made his employees pay him to work for him. That's insane. Right? Like, that's also so like Will Price designed a lot of houses in, say, like Wayne and Overbrook. Here's an ad for buying houses in Wayne and St. David's. Here's one in Wayne. Here's one in Overbrook. Here's a Frank Lloyd Wright house. Terrible. He took all these designs for Overbrook and, well, this is Overbrook, this is Wayne, and he made them available in a book that he published. He published several books on the designs that he made and encouraged people to make those houses. Again, Frank Lloyd Wright made his employees pay to work for him. So, like, not the same kind of guy. But there was a problem that as they would develop places like Overbrook and Wayne, it would naturally make the land around these developments way more expensive. So that if you ever wanted to expand, it would cost you exponentially more every single time. This is where an idea called Georgism comes in. Georgism is kind of like Marxism for rich people, except that Marx also thought Georgism was the last ditch of capitalism. That's what he literally called it. It was founded by this guy, Henry George. And if you believe it, Henry George lived in San Francisco at a time when it was ruled by a technocratic elite and inequality was off the charts. It's hard to believe. But he did. And those technocrats all owned railroads, not like the technocrats now who own us. So he was going around Berkeley, and he saw a field off in the distance with some cows on it, and he asked the farmer how much it cost per acre. The farmer told him $1,000, which was like $1 million in that time. And so this really, really upset him. If you can read this billboard here, it's basically talking about speculators. It's talking about people who will buy up plots of land near development and just sit on them waiting for them to get more expensive. So the basic idea of Georgism is the idea that land would be collectively owned and all the produce off of that land would be untaxed. So that initial lease, usually most ideas have it as a 99-year lease on the land, would be the only government money you paid. Only, right? Some people also called it single tax. It was incredibly popular. He wrote about it in a book called Something in Progress. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Anyway, he wrote it down in a book, and he sold 3 million copies of that book in the late 19th century. And so 3 million copies of a book back then is crazy. Yeah, it's called Progress and Poverty, an inquiry into the cause of industrial depression and of increase in want and increase in wealth. The Remedy, 1879. It was massively popular. He was massively popular. Like Tolstoy was a Georgist, Einstein was a Georgist. He beat Teddy Roosevelt in a mayoral election in New York. He still lost, but he just did beat Teddy Roosevelt. His funeral was like the most popular thing that happened in New York other than Abraham Lincoln's funeral. And Georgists sort of started immediately trying to implement Georgism. And one of those places was Arden, Delaware. The people who moved to Arden first tried to make all of Delaware Georgist, and that didn't work, and a lot of them went to jail because of the tactics they chose. So instead, Price and his friend Frank Stevens, a sculptor, they started trying to sort of, they kind of combined Henry George's ideas of Georgism with William Morris's ideas of sort of arts and crafts, and they tried to create a community in Arden, Delaware. And it didn't really work out. The Georgia stuff was a little bit harder to implement. They ended up kind of creating like a really cool summer community, which then became kind of like a commuter community for Wilmington and Philadelphia. Price himself never actually lived there, as far as I know. But a few other interesting people lived there. Joseph Robinette Biden lived there as a small child. Upton Sinclair lived there after he wrote The Jungle. And a woman named Elizabeth McGee lived there, and she made a game called The Landlord's Game. Now, The Landlord's Game was meant to be an educational board game teaching kids about Georgism and really about like the evils of capitalism. So naturally, a capitalist stole it and turned it into Monopoly. The reason that Monopoly is a horrible game and is not fun to play is because it's supposed to be teaching you that capitalism doesn't work. I don't know why we play that game. Yeah, okay. So anyway, Arden, Delaware didn't work out very well. At one point, they were looking at sort of trying to buy a country called Andorra. That didn't happen. So Price went back to focusing on Rose Valley. Now, Rose Valley, even if Price had never come to Rose Valley would have a pretty interesting history. It has Minqua's Path, which is sort of like a pedestrian highway from the pre-Columbian era. The land was originally given to a family called the Vernons, who then had the land confiscated from them because they were royalists during the Revolutionary War. Then it was owned by a family who owned a snuff mill. And by the time Price was growing up, it was often referred to as Rogues Valley, and it was like a really good place to get robbed on your way between Chester and Media. It was pretty dangerous. And it had 12 buildings, not counting the old mill. And so Price and his friends, his sort of co-conspirators, they all started moving there. They started working there. They turned the old bobbin mill into a artist's workshop. They started publishing this magazine called The Artsman. And if this sounds familiar, it's because it's like basically gentrification. This is pretty much like what my friends and I did in Philadelphia 20 years ago. You all load into a warehouse, you make some art, you hope people buy it, they don't, and then you get a real job. So that's like basically what happened. They made some amazing furniture, they made some great housewares, they ended up being hugely inspirational for the Bauhaus. A lot of the Bauhaus founders were big Price fans. But ultimately, that didn't really work out. and they moved on to, or they kind of returned to developing the same way that they had developed Wayne and Overbrook with this house. So this is Rose Valley Improvement Company house number 1. And this is the reason that I'm doing this lecture, because I worked on this house a lot when I was very young. If you see this, that's a skylight that is not original. I helped put that skylight in. I almost passed out sanding all of the drywall inside of that incredibly hot skylight. And then the next year, I was smashing toilets in a dumpster out front where that Chevy is, and I fell out and I knocked my eye out, and then I had to go to the hospital. And I was like 12 or 13, so I had to lie and say I wasn't working, and it was bad. It was a mess. But anyway, Price kept developing Rose Valley with house number 2, 3, 4, until his death in 1916. He died at 54 years old, which is basically like teenage for an architect. I think it's a massive shame that we don't know what he would have done during the sort of post-war construction boom. We don't really know how he would have responded to, say, like things like the Sears Craftsman House, which is a direct response to his Democrat house, which you can go visit in Rose Valley. It's a real meaningful question to wonder what Price would have done during a time period where America was actually building. So what about Georgism? Well, how's Georgism doing? It's actually doing really good. It's basically what China does. You get 99-year leases. The difference is that the Chinese Communist Party does actually have a lot more say over like what you do on that land, but it allows for massive developments incredibly fast. We don't know what will happen at the end of those 99-year leases because none of them have matured yet. So I don't know. We'll see. One of the other crappier places that Georgism is thriving is with people like this. This is Curtis Yarvin. He is a greasy little weirdo, and he's also Elon Musk's personal philosopher. He calls himself a neo-geolibertarian. He wants to use Georgism to basically recreate slavery. He's not a good person. But anyway, that's where Georgism is at. Just thought I'd give everyone an update. So next, right before he died, William Price's son, Billy Price, started working for him, developing the rest of Rose Valley, as well as doing other work, I think for the Pennsylvania Railroad, a few other things. But after his father's death, he left the firm and joined the newly founded American Friends Service Committee and went off to France to help rebuild. And when he got back from France, he became a teacher, and he became sort of friends and mentor to a young Edmund Bacon. That's not a picture of Edmund Bacon. That's Kevin Bacon, because I can't find a young picture of Edmund Bacon. They don't actually look that similar. But that's his son, you know. Anyway, Edmund Bacon... sorry, I lost my place. So Edmund Bacon was born in West Philly, but he spent his adolescence and a big chunk of his youth in Rose Valley. He was good friends with the Price family. As everything that I've read sort of implies that they were very influential on him becoming an architect. And he became, a very big deal. He tends to be lumped in with people like Robert Moses of New York and Edward Logue of Boston. If you'll notice, they're basically doing this. They're kind of doing a similar thing, right? But he's not really like them. They were all city planners. Logue and Moses were really more like machine politicians first and city planners second. They also were very openly racist. And Edmund Bacon was a bit more utopian, to say the least. I think because of his sort of Quaker background, because of his time in Rose Valley, I think that he viewed the city as sort of a garden in which to nurture a citizenry. And I think that Logue and Moses viewed cities as sort of raw materials to be exploited. And they behaved that way. So in between his time in Rose Valley and being the head of the Philly City Planning Commission, Bacon would do a lot of stuff. He worked for the WPA. He was influential in the beginning of the FHA, the Federal Housing Authority, which actually got him run out of Flint, Michigan by anti-communists. He was involved in rewriting the new Home Rule Charter in Philadelphia. And by the time, we're approaching the middle of the century and Bacon's in charge of the City Planning Commission, he has a lot of work cut out for him. In the same way that I am older than all of the skyscrapers in Philadelphia, Bacon was older than the sort of modern shape of Philadelphia and the modern borders. So when Penn founded Philadelphia, it was really just this spot. And the rest of it was a commons called the Liberty Lands. And pretty quickly, the commons started filling up with new, small, little cities. Those cities are all neighborhoods now. They're things like Northern Liberties, Kensington, West Philadelphia, Powelton Village. And they all had very different laws. They had different building regulations. Buildings were built with different materials. Philadelphia, the original Philadelphia, is sitting on top of a huge clay deposit. So all of those houses were made out of brick. All of the other houses were made out of wood. You could do things like start an anti-Catholic riot and then escape to a different neighboring city, and no one could do anything to you, which is the kind of violence that caused the founding of the Philadelphia Police Department. There was also a second compounding factor, and that's really unique to Philadelphia, and that's that we never really build any low-income housing here. We build new fancy housing, and then we let poor people move into the previously fancy housing. There's obviously the tenements down by the old mill. There's some worker accommodations in Chester, but for the most part, Pennsylvania and southeastern Pennsylvania just didn't build apartments, didn't build low-income housing. The first apartment building in Philadelphia is actually the Divine Lorraine, which was like a luxury building. So that's what Edmund Bacon is inheriting. And, like the Philadelphia that we interact with today is as much his Philadelphia as it is Penn's. I mean, this is the sort of city plan here. All of the darker areas are areas that, he personally oversaw the construction of. If you look, this is the Parkway before him and the Parkway after. So there's just kind of too much to cover. There's too much to talk about. He changed way too much. One thing that's worth mentioning that he didn't have anything to do with, or he didn't envision, is the layout of the highways. He inherited that plan, and they're not good. So his predecessor Mitchell decided where 95 would be. He decided where 676 would be. He decided where 76 would be. His predecessor Mitchell is also the guy that capitulated to Gladwin. Gladwin is the reason that 76 is down by the river and terrible. And everyone in Gladwin owes all of us like years of our lives back. He oversaw the construction of those things, but he did not oversee the planning. What he oversaw was the sort of urban renewal of Center City. And the sort of crown jewel of that renewal is Love Park. So Love Park, sorry, it's getting a little dark, it's hard to read. Love Park was a park that connected the Parkway to City Hall. Technically, there is still a thing there called Love Park, but it's not Love Park. It's like a weird parking lot for like food trucks now. I'm not a fan. So Love Park gets its name from the Robert Indiana statue that was put there for a bicentennial back in 76 that was meant to be a World's Fair, but that never materialized. It was, I think, the third World's Fair that really didn't work out for Philadelphia. We don't do them anymore. But it's not called Love Park, it's called JFK Plaza because it was built when JFK was assassinated a couple of years afterwards. But it was actually designed by Bacon at Cornell in the 30s when Kennedy was still like a freshman at Choate. Now, a lot of ideas get tried out in Philadelphia or Delco and then spread to the rest of the world. This is the Kirkbride Center. It's It's really the first modern mental health facility. It's in West Philadelphia, and it was repeated everywhere. Love Park is basically like the Kirkbride Center of skateboarding. This is Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2, by the way. Love Park is not in the first Tony Hawk Pro Skater video game, but it's in every subsequent Tony Hawk Pro Skater video game. Sorry, I got ahead of myself here. So Love Park is a unique skate spot in that it allows you to do lines. It allows you to connect different obstacles and different tricks together at the same time. And that's kind of what made it the birthplace of street skating. Places on the West Coast, like, say, the Embarcadero in San Francisco, they have similar obstacles, but they're kind of set pieces that are away from each other. Bacon's interest in sort of having a flowing space meant that skateboarders could actually move through it very easily. It also, unique to Love Park was the fact that it was so connected to public transit. That a suburban kid like me could literally cross the street from Suburban Station and be in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. But all of this brought a lot of attention, a lot of negative attention from the Philly Police Department. They hated it. Here's another one, and another one. So when Love Park was initially designed, no one thought to make skateboarding illegal there because no one thought anyone would go skateboarding there. It wasn't until years later when sort of skateboarding had changed, the kickflip had been invented, the 360 flip, which was from that first image. That's when people started skating. And so by 1984, the city outlawed skateboarding in Love Park. And over time, the punishments for skating in Love Park would just keep getting more and more exorbitant until the early 2000s when it was a $300 fine, a ticket, a summons, and they confiscated your board. Now, at the same time that they did this, the street administration also went and asked ESPN to host the X Games, which is the Extreme Olympics, in Love Park. So this is a still from there. You could watch people skateboard Love Park on TV, but if you went and did that, it was a $300 fine. Now, Ed Bacon, coming from a community that let 5-year-olds vote, this really upset him. This really bothered him. He really believed that the people of Philadelphia should decide what happens in Philadelphia, and that city council was in no position to tell skateboarders how to use this place, right? I think that while his intention was to bring people together, Love Park was kind of put where it was when it was to kind of keep people moving, to keep people from congregating. And the real threat of skateboarding is that people were congregating in places they're not supposed to congregate. Skateboarding is it's a sport, but it's also kind of not a sport. It's a lot like rock climbing or surfing. You know, if you want to hang out with a mountain, you have to climb it. If you want to hang out with a wave, you have to ride it. Otherwise, these things will literally kill you. And so skateboarding is a way of kind of interacting with these liminal, minimalist, modern spaces designed to keep you from enjoying yourself. I think that's pretty powerful. And so Bacon started going out there on his lunch break and doing this.
And now I, Edmund Bacon, in total defiance of Mayor Good, in total defiance of Mayor Street and the Council of the City of Philadelphia, hereby exercise my rights as a citizen of the United States, and I deliberately skate in my beloved Love Park. Oh. Oh God! Thank you, thank you, thank you! My whole damn life has been worth it just for this moment.
So anyway, that's the first time I knew who Edmund Bacon was. I remember seeing that on the news. But it turns out he just kept doing that. He would go out on his lunch break even when cameras weren't there, genuinely trying to get arrested by the city for skateboarding. He also, in his own role as a historical preservationist, he lobbied the city and the state to make skateboarding a historically protected activity in Love Park, because he really felt like someone figured out what to do with this park he made. You know, like somebody finally understood like how to appreciate his creation, and they made it illegal. So, you know, like Penn tried to avoid the chaos that granting land, like a noble person granting land, would create, and then accidentally oversaw a witch trial of his own. Price, for a time at least, really didn't want to be a landlord, but he wound up being a landlord. Bacon finally had someone use his space in a way that he appreciated, and the city he worked for arrested them. I think that, I don't know what the conclusion of that is. I think that's just the human experience of just trying to recreate a better version of the world that you grew up in. But there is a pretty interesting epilogue to the Love Park story. So about 10 years after Bacon's death, they start tearing Love Park down. And people keep skating it until literally the last piece of granite is removed. And then, even after that, they go out to the woods and they find the place they're storing the pieces of granite, and they keep skating that. And you know, like, here's one of them with the trash can, right? So then, the city of Philadelphia sells Love Park in pieces to Sweden. They ship it back through the port of Gothenburg, the same port that Margaret Matson traveled through on her way here, and they rebuilt it in Malmo as a skate park. I don't know. It's anyway, that's my presentation. Thanks a lot. Any questions? Where's this statue? Yeah. It's on top of City Hall still.
With eyes like that?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. This is a photo from the last time they cleaned it. Yeah. Yeah, he's a 20-foot tall statue. Anyway, no questions? Any questions? Mac?
Can you say more about the way that the land was divided up into smaller parcels by people who participated in the witch accusations?
Oh, yeah.
Land staying larger? Like, what do you think was going on?
A few different things. So that pattern of keeping the land intact, so like the western edge of Delco is Chester County, and Chester County still has much bigger communities. A lot of those people were wealthier. And the other issue is like the same thing that makes sort of Georgism appealing, and that is once they built Philadelphia, the eastern part of Delco was worth more. That's certainly true. Yeah, I mean, there's also there's a lot more, there were more existing people in the eastern part of Delco. So that's where most of the Swedes lived. That's where the handful of Dutch people that lived here, native Lenape people who had like built houses and stayed after the settlers got here. And so once people start staking a claim and like building towns, that was a big part of it. I mean, one of the weirdest things about Delco is that almost all of Delco is a planned community. They're just very old planned communities. And so as people start sort of planning more and more, they start dividing. They start getting into conflict with each other and then making it even smaller. Yeah. Anybody else? Did I skate Love Park? No, I was not good enough. I skated FDR. So like there's some stuff that I cut out of this. One of them was the skaters worked really hard to actually come up with compromises with the city of Philadelphia, and one of them is a skate park called FDR. FDR is under 95 in FDR Park. FDR is more fun to ride because it's a lot more sort of ramps and obstacles. I was not good enough to skate. Also, you don't get arrested at FDR. You're supposed to skate there. But there's distinct groups of people. So like Bam Margera, who is not famous for skateboarding now, but was a famous skateboarder. He was an FDR guy, whereas like Kerry Getz, Josh Kalis, they were Love Park people. And you sort of see how those things change. So like sort of big ramp riders, they come from FDR. More technical grind-based people, they come from Love Park. But no, I went to Love Park a fair amount. I just watched. There was a kind of I wouldn't necessarily call it macho, but there was a hierarchy to Love Park. There was a bench that you never sat on because someone died there. There were tricks you didn't try. There was a whole sort of language to that place that like I didn't understand. Whereas like FDR was a place that my dad would take me on the weekends because it was free, and he was, like my parents were divorced. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, they recreated Love Park in Malmo. It's not the whole thing. They don't have the fountain. It's really just like one section of benches and these flagstones. So you see here, I have a lot of slides, so I'm not going to go all the way back to the beginning. But in the first skating poster I showed you, they're doing the same thing. That's sort of the famous thing you can do at Love Park. And it's because Bacon designed the park to be kind of modular, which meant that you could pry those flagstones up and use them as ramps. So they just rebuilt basically one section, about a quarter of the park. Yeah, I mean, people come to that skate park because, so any skate park you go to on Earth is a recreation of Love Park. It is like if you see the street skating course in the Olympics, the street skating course in professional street league. If you go to Paynes Park by the art museum, it is all a repetition of those ledges and benches that made Love Park what it is. So there are signs in Malmo, but they kind of don't need them because it is the most famous skate spot probably ever. It's up there with Hollywood High School, which is the other big one in California. Like if you watch a skate video from the 90s, there will be footage filmed in Philadelphia in Love Park. Like there just will be. So, anybody else? Okay. Thanks a lot.
I'm just going to say one thing. Well, thank you all very much for coming out. I just want to say, again, our thanks to Zac Beaver. If you can get one more round of applause for that wonderful presentation. A couple real quick reminders. We are having our next lecture on May 21st. It will be outdoors, and again, that will feature Reverend Alexis Washington from Campbell's AME speaking on the history of the church. And tomorrow, we are having our open house here from 1 to 7. We will be featuring items on display that have never been displayed before, and some really unique pieces from Benjamin West, John Morton, and of course, Mr. William Penn. So please come out. And it's also, again, Delco Gives. Please donate. Go to delcogives.org and donate money to DCHS so we can keep doing this type of programming. So thank you all very much for coming out. Please get home safely. Take care.
Yeah.